Oh, by the way, before we start, I have to ask you one question, Tino. Do you like tarantulas?
Tarantulas? That's a
Yeah.
random question, but I'm gonna say a hard no. Why?
No, I was just thinking if you did, maybe I could nickname you Tarantino, but
Oh,
I guess not.
all right. So we're dropping those. Nice, dude.
Got to start on the right page, bro.
Yes, dude. Loving it, man. Well, dude, hey, thanks for coming on, man. I've been following you for a long time. I found out about you through your brother Jon Venus. So it's rad to be talking with you, man. And I have like a million questions I want to go through with you, but um,
Awesome, awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on, Tino. It's great to be here.
absolutely, man. The first thing that's on my mind, and obviously a lot of people's minds, is like what's going on right now, this pandemic crisis. And I know you're a medical doctor. I was wondering, like, how's your perspective been, especially being in Spain, where at
Yeah,
least
yeah,
here in the States, we're hearing that it's much worse in Spain, especially Italy too, and Europe. So,
yeah, yeah.
dude, tell us how things are in your part of the world.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, as you said, it's one of the worst places at the moment, right? There's a lot of, we're, talking 500 plus deaths a day. Italy's been closer to 1,000 a day for a while now. So it's definitely quite a bad situation. And, as far as I can remember, I can't remember any outbreaks this serious in the past. And that's why I had a bit of, this virus kind of kicked me in the butt a little bit because in the beginning, I thought, as is often the case when it comes to mainstream media news, when it comes to disasters and all this kind of stuff, a lot of times they dramatize things and put things a little bit too far on one side, right? And I thought, this is probably one of those times, and I'm not too worried about this virus. It's just another one of many outbreaks. But then when you look at the projections from the biggest organizations who are working with this outbreak, and you look at the numbers that would come to be if we did nothing to mitigate the effects of the outbreak, right? We're talking about not just thousands, but we're talking about millions upon millions upon millions of people losing their lives. So it's definitely a huge, huge outbreak, and it's a yeah. I mean, there's a reason why everyone's taking it so seriously, right?
Oh, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I definitely underestimated too. Like, I started sharing all the memes, and like everyone else, like
Mm.
it's like whatever. These statistics do not compare to heart disease, but obviously
Yeah,
now I think all of us are wrong about it. No one expected this. So,
yeah, yeah.
are you
Well, I mean,
seeing?
the one, yeah, sorry to interrupt. I mean, the one thing is it's kind of like it's very different in terms of the type of disease we're talking about, right? So a lot of people say, we shouldn't be comparing heart disease to this, but of course, like heart disease, is killing between 25 and 30,000 people every single day, right? And cancer is up there even higher, like closer to 30,000 as well. So, it's definitely, if you're going to take the raw numbers of people, there are definitely a lot more people dying of these things, right? But that's again, it's quite a different demographic. It's a different pathology, a different type of disease. But that's why I think so many people underestimate it, because in the beginning, when it comes to coronavirus, we're seeing only as it spreads, right? We're seeing only a few cases, only a few deaths. But then what happens is it spreads so quickly that by the time you see how serious it is, it's already thousands and thousands or millions of people might even have it. So now I think we've gone past 300,000, or maybe even close to 400,000 cases, and those are the tested ones. So there might be a lot more than that that aren't tested, right? So, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, in terms of the numbers, when we're talking 10,000 people, that might not be a huge number compared to from a world perspective, right? It's, of course, there's a huge number of people who are dying, but from a world perspective, when you're thinking we're 7 billion people and every single day 150,000 people die, right? Then you don't think that's doesn't sound like a huge deal on a world scale. But again, like I said, the projections say that we could reach 30, 40, 50 million people if we did nothing about it. So it's definitely a threat.
Yeah, and what's interesting is that it's from animal origin too, which like the mainstream's
Mhm.
not really talking about too much of how this thing started, just like what to do at this point. But I think it's good to like look at the cause of something, like at least where it came from, to acknowledge that so we don't continue it in the future. I'm
Mhm.
not an expert but I've been trying to like I've been following along a little bit and have noticed that most of these pandemics, at least the viral ones, the infections,
Mhm.
have
Yeah.
come from animal origin. I don't know if you would.
100%, 100%. Even going back to the Spanish influenza, which is probably the biggest killer in modern history, right? Going to H1N1, the avian flus, right? The swine flu. All of these are coming from animal origins. And what happens is basically you have different types of viruses that meet through interspecies contact, and they kind of almost have, I guess, like a viral mixing where they almost reproduce together, and then they have this offspring baby virus, which is different enough that our immune system isn't prepared to fight it. So we have new outbreaks constantly, right? So yeah, it's when you look at the Chinese wet markets and all this kind of stuff in Asia, where you might have a little tiny room with animals from South America, from Asia, from Africa, and all these animals are put together in this tiny confinement, and they're slaughtered with almost no hygiene practice. The slaughter, the workers are sometimes not even wearing gloves, and just blood everywhere. You're thinking, this is, if anybody was to design an environment to produce viral outbreaks, this would be it. It's almost like somebody is trying to create the next outbreak. So it's really it's really something we should be talking a lot more about. And I think, again, the whole world is in outrage and everyone is talking about it, but it's unfortunate that we're only, I always think about this, human beings are so reactive. We're not thinking preventative, we're not thinking causal. Same with all the restrictions. After it becomes a pandemic, then we shut down all the flights. Probably we should have done that before it became a pandemic, right? But we're always reacting. We're never, very few times we're really addressing the cause when it comes to big complex issues like this, which is a shame for sure.
Yeah, absolutely, for sure. And I think by now most people know kind of what it is. It's like, it's symptoms at least are shortness of breath, right? Cough, fever. I think if I'm correct.
Yeah, yeah. So it's very similar to the flu for most people. Very, very similar.
You probably can't
Yeah.
tell it apart. I'm sure it's
No,
very
exactly,
difficult.
exactly.
So,
Yeah.
if people experience these, obviously talk to your doctor and figure out what's going on.
And avoid social contact even more than usual, right? Is the important part there, because there's a lot of people are talking about it, so there's also going to be a lot of misinformation. People thinking that this is spread through the air and you have to wear masks at all times, and that you can spread it for weeks and weeks and weeks before getting sick and stuff like that. But still, even though we're learning about it, there's new information, and we'll all have to be humble enough to change our opinions as better information comes in, right? That's part of being a kind of scientifically oriented. But as of now, it still looks like the people who are the most at risk of transmitting it to other people are people who are actually sick with it, not the asymptomatic. Now, obviously, there's some evidence that that might also be an issue, but you can't. It's way, when the main issue is the people who have symptoms. That's a much better thing to focus on than trying to focus on that all the people are asymptomatic, because you can't really tell apart the asymptomatic with it or not. But that's why we're doing the social distancing. That's why we're canceling events. There's very little live events all over the world. Gyms are closed. Like any public gathering kind of service is closed. Stores, cafes, restaurants. So, this is definitely going to put a big break on the outbreak for sure. Which is why, I think this might just be one of the few times ever where I feel like the media scare will actually come in handy and be very helpful. Whereas most times all the fear mongering is very unhelpful. This time it might actually be a good thing.
I agree with you. Sometimes it's like definitely played up, and it took me by surprise for sure. But definitely take it seriously. Definitely social distance yourself from people, because, like you said, even if you catch it and you're asymptomatic or you're young and you can fight this thing, you may very well end up passing it on to somebody who can't handle it, an elderly or somebody with an immune suppressed system. So definitely take it seriously, and maybe it won't be too hard, because if you're like an introvert like me, you've been preparing for this your whole life. Staying indoors
Nice,
is
nice.
probably not like a big deal. So
Very good, very good. Yeah, it's easier for some people than others.
Yeah. So, awesome, man. Well, thank you for touching base on that a little bit, sharing your experience. But yeah, let's get back to the original reason why I brought you on. So, like I said, you're a medical doctor, you a fellow YouTuber, a vegan, of course, and an athlete. So, again, welcome to the show. I
Thank you.
wanted to ask you. So, first of all, your brother Jon Venus, who's a big YouTuber. If you guys don't know of him, what are you doing? Like, follow
Mhm.
him as well. Um, which
Follow
one?
me first, though.
Follow Leo first, then John. Who went vegan first? Was it you that influenced him? If I'm correct.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. So that's that's definitely how it went, which is I love to remind him of that. But anyways, yeah, I've been vegan a little over 7 years now, and a funny thing about it is actually John was out of the entire family, John was the most against it, and he was the one who had the strongest kind of emotional reaction, that conflicting kind of argumentative vibe. Always, he was always talking about how I'm gonna get weak, lose muscles, get sick. It's just a phase. At the time, was introduced to the idea by my ex-girlfriend, and he would say, it's just a phase. You're just doing it for your girlfriend, all that kind of stuff. But you see, a few years later, he's become one of the most passionate and vegans who's really putting the word out there, and has done so much for this movement. So it just goes to show, even if somebody seems to be extremely against something, don't give up on them, because they might surprise you.
Yeah, for sure. He's definitely outspoken. And one of my questions was, a lot of people will ask how can you get like a friend, especially a family member who you're living with, to go vegan? Because you bring it up, and I feel like it creates more tension, most of the
Mhm.
time. So, what ended up helping you to get him to listen to you?
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's a great question. It's the I guess it's that's the $1 million question, right? That's what we all want to know, exactly how to. And to give some background, that was actually something I struggled a lot with in the beginning, was how to best communicate and really spread the message as efficiently as possible to get as many people to jump on board the movement as possible, right? You feel you have this responsibility on your shoulders to get as many people to jump on board, so that you're helping the environment, the animals, etc. So it's something that you understand, people are so motivated and so passionate to share. But it just so happens with human, behavioral psychology, human nature, oftentimes the more you want something, the further you push it away. And the more you try to avoid something, the closer you bring it to yourself, right? So when it comes to influencing people, it certainly is the case that the more you push something on someone, the more resistance you usually get. And so for me, it was kind of I guess, a lucky situation, and kind of wasn't really I wasn't really very knowledgeable in terms of influencing and communicating these ideas. But I was just, number one, living very far away from everyone, so I didn't have the chance to be as pushy as maybe I would have liked to be. And secondly, I guess I took it from a very scientific approach, where I would just say, hey guys, like, I'm doing this, and I have some really interesting documentaries that I think you guys should watch, and let people, make their decisions from there. And it was a slow process, and now I'm blessed to say that my parents, all my siblings, the whole close core family is all vegan, which is amazing. It's such a luxury when you come home for holidays or Christmas and everyone's on the same page and you're all eating the same food. And it's probably one of the things I get the most often on Instagram, is people being like, "Oh, you're so lucky, your whole family is vegan," because it causes a lot of stress and a lot of conflict for a lot of people when different family members are doing different things, and there's always a bit of tension and all that kind of stuff, right? So I think the most important thing was to kind of let them take their time. They took years. That first, my parents were going at 5 days a week vegan, and they would eat whatever they want on the weekend. That for me was a huge win, huge win. And then slowly but surely, we got everyone over the way. But I have to say though, from for my family at least, and it's probably different for every person, but it was really getting the scientific approach to allow them to understand that it's not dangerous, right? It's not a risky thing to do for your health, and being in them. My apologies. Let me put this phone on silent here. Um, But so to get them to understand that it's not a risky thing, so they don't have to worry about it from that side of things. But that wasn't enough to motivate them to go 100% of the way. That was enough for them to be comfortable with me doing it. So what did it for my family was definitely, once they understood that it's doable and it's not dangerous and it might actually even be healthy, I was actually starting to take a look at the ethical side. So both for John, for my parents, it was really the ethical aspect, and documentaries such as Earthlings, showcase this very, very nicely. And well, not nicely. It's not nice to watch, but has a very beautiful, very important message to share, and that's definitely what did it for them.
That's awesome, man. Congrats on getting your whole family to go vegan. I know it's not easy. I got my family to go vegan as well. I have a
Awesome,
younger
awesome.
brother, and my parents eventually went plant-based. So it was really cool, man. But as I'm sure you experienced, it was a struggle at first. But like you said, if
Yeah,
you like, you love these people, right? They're your family. You don't
yeah.
want to give up on them, and you want the best for them. So there's definitely been some rough moments, but I think speaking up, I definitely don't regret it, as I'm sure you don't.
Yeah, no, 100%, 100%. And that's the thing I think the most important thing as well is to really realize that people aren't giving you resistance because they're against you, right? This is a kind of a personal, a natural reaction human beings have when somebody argues against you, that they're, this somehow like me versus you dynamic going on. But that's not the case. They've just come to the place they are now because of a million different influencing factors from the moment they were born to the moment today. They've been influenced by so many things from their childhood, their parents, their environment, their jobs, their schooling, the TVs and movies and everything. So they're actually just they have a different circumstance, a different mindset, and they're just seeing things from their perspective. So they're usually they want the best for you, and they're just worried about you, and they're worried about themselves. They're worried about their health. So really, it's very important to kind of distance yourself emotionally and try not to be very not too emotionally invested, and take things personally, because that's probably the easiest way to mess things up when it comes to influencing people into the vegan or plant-based direction, is really getting yourself too deeply invested emotionally to the point where you have arguments rather than discussions. And that's what I like to say. I never have arguments. It's one of my favorite sayings is the only way to win an argument is to avoid one, and focus on having discussions instead of arguments.
Yeah, yeah, beautiful, man. Yeah, absolutely. And at the end of the day, it's the other person's decision anyway. You can't make them go vegan or make them do
Exactly.
anything.
Yeah, man, I hear that all the time. It's like, "Oh, how did you make them go vegan?" I'm like, "I didn't I didn't make anyone." I didn't like wave my vegan hand over them like, "Oh, you are now vegan." Like, no, that doesn't work, It's like they make themselves go vegan. You can only try to nudge them along and influence them and give them your perspective, and but in the end of the day, like you said, it's their decision.
Right, right. And was that sort of like passion to really influence others in a better way? Is that what kind of led you to go into medicine?
I mean, medicine was kind of a it's a complicated, like it's a multifactorial thing. So many things went into it. One of the reasons was definitely because I knew as a doctor, even though now after going through medical school, I actually know that it shouldn't be so, but I knew that doctors get taken a lot more seriously when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to health, and now that I've been through medical school, I can tell you they shouldn't be, in terms of nutrition at least, because the nutrition training doctors get is pathetic to be blunt. But definitely did play a role in that decision. And otherwise, it was just I was always very good at mathematics and science, and these kinds of things just came naturally to me. And I was always very interested in health, so kind of medicine just looked like the a logical decision for me. But I never, a lot of my colleagues and classmates throughout the years had, multiple family members. They had dreams of being doctors since they were a kid. Like for me, it was never that. I was just like, I'm pretty good at this. I'll give it a try, and then I went for it. But so it was nothing like glorious, glamorous dreams. But yeah, that's pretty much how it went.
Yeah, and you kind of mentioned this a little bit, but I think right now you've had what, like about like a year or 2 years like of experience after being certified as a medical doctor, right? About that.
Yeah. So I graduated almost a year ago now. Yeah.
So you've gotten a good bit of experience so far, like an idea of how things are. Like you mentioned, what are some things that you want to change in the medical field?
Yeah, yeah. So just to clarify, I'm actually not practicing as a doctor. I've decided to go, my own separate direction. But yeah, I definitely have had a lot of experience in, throughout the years, going through the system, going through different rotations, clinicals, following doctors, observerships, all that kind of stuff. And I think for me, one of the biggest problems of medicine still is that it's very paternalistic and very traditional in a way. So a lot of things that are done in medicine are still done just because it's the way it's always been, which is kind of goes in the 180 degrees, almost completely opposite direction of what science is meant to be. Right? Science is, hey, here's what the best fact, the best evidence, the science suggests is to be true. This is the best truth we have at the moment. Let's follow that, right? Whereas in medicine, a lot of times things are very slow to be adopted because of the fact that we have this traditional kind of culture, and there's still a lot of hierarchy. There's still a lot of the junior doctors are given all the worst jobs, and the higher ups are thought of as like the big bosses who make all the decisions and know everything, but obviously completely unrealistic. And there's a lot of ego in medicine as well. A lot of doctors who have huge egos, and it's just, yeah, again, I think just like with spreading veganism, communication and behavioral psychology is the most difficult, and when it comes to medicine it's the same thing. Doctors are human beings like anyone else, and they're not gods, they're not superior beings, they're none of this stuff that people sometimes make them out to be. And so they're prone to the same mistakes as every other human being. And I can tell you for sure, doctors make a lot of mistakes, a lot of mistakes. So it's important to remember that you're talking to a human being on the other side, and if there's one thing that makes us human, one of the things we all have in common is we all make mistakes. That's part of being human.
Absolutely, yeah, yeah, just like anyone. But yes, I have noticed that certain doctors do have that ego and that they are the authority. Where like a
Mm.
lot of these problems, like we talked about, they are nutrition based, and you see the potential of the medical system and just humanity in itself. We're facing a crisis right now, the coronavirus, right? Came out of nowhere. I mean, we're like what, a few months into this thing, and
Yeah,
like
yeah,
the action that we've taken is amazing. I mean,
yeah,
like it could be so much worse, right? We've taken good action
100%.
so far, dude. Like imagine if we tackled nutrition based issues like heart disease,
Hmm.
certain forms of cancers, diabetes, with the same amount of urgency.
Hmm. Hmm.
Like we would be in such a better place. We would decrease the leading cause of death, heart disease,
Yeah.
cancers, diabetes, like all this stuff would be gone essentially.
Hmm.
Why do you feel that it's so slow, to take
Hmm.
action? Do you feel like it is because of that, you know, egocentric, or just like, I need to follow this traditional method,
Hmm.
that there's not like too
Yeah,
much
yeah,
thinking outside the
yeah.
box?
Yeah, I get you. It's a really good question. I think it's something that's very very central to like you said, all these lifestyle related diseases that have such a huge potential to avoid sick years, avoid pain, avoid suffering, and also the economical value of having people, less bills to pay, less procedures, more work time, more productivity in society in general. So it's just amazing benefits, and I think it's a multifactorial thing. It's a very complex combination of things that is causing this as well. The traditional aspect of things is definitely one of them. The human aspect, that doctors, like anyone else, are human, and they also believe that you need meat for protein, and you need this and that. You need milk for calcium. You need fish for omega 3s. All that kind of stuff, right? I've heard it all the same stuff. Carbs make you fat. I've heard doctors say all the same stuff you hear regular people talk about, right? So we doctors also have their biases and their misconceptions as everyone else, but then what really holds it back, and this is kind of, I guess, a little bit dark, but I believe it is just again, not because somebody's trying to be evil on purpose. It's just the way the system, this huge, massive, complicated system, has fallen into place and has worked for a while. Is it's really industry driven, right? And when it comes to something like coronavirus, which is very direct, it's an infectious disease. The industries are obviously very interested in vaccines. They're interested when it comes to bacteria. You have medications that can fight these things, right? Whereas lifestyle related diseases like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, for the most part, um, fixing those things isn't going to get you a lot of money. It's actually going to do the opposite, right? Whereas treating them for uh, 10, 20, 30, 40. And on a side note, actually, this is one of the problems with antibiotics is usually the industry isn't that interested in making new antibiotics, and we're having this increase in resistance, antibiotic resistance, which is also due to a big part animal agriculture, by the way, on a side note. But the thing that you see there is that the industry is not that interested in making new antibiotics because you're putting someone on an antibiotic for 3, 6, 7, 10 days, and that's it. Whereas for a statin, or a blood pressure or a blood sugar medication, you're talking about putting someone on it for 30 years. So the profit margins for the industry is on a completely different scale. It's huge. So that's where really the pharmaceutical industry is interested in, right? But something like the virus is, again, it's more, it's not something you can prevent as easily, but it's something that you can, again, profit on with vaccines and this kind of stuff. And there, I think uh, also just the I guess concept of it being a very visible, like it's an infection. You get the virus, cause and effect, done. It's very simple in that way. Whereas most lifestyle related diseases are very multifactorial and very complex. So it's a combination of all of these things. But in the end of the day, I think industry is really what drives medical education. That's the reason we don't get taught a lot of nutrition, is because there's not a lot of money to be made by telling people to eat more broccoli and eat less cheese and processed meat and processed sugar and processed carbs and all that kind of stuff. Whereas, medications, pharmaceuticals, surgery, these are things that make a lot of money for the industry. And these are things that are emphasized a lot heavier in the medical education than anything else. So I think, in the end of the day, it comes down to money. Again, not because there's one big bad rich guy at the top, the Illuminati boss of medicine, who's just telling us all what to do. It's nothing like that. It's just, I think it's a complex system that's just become the way it is. And unfortunately today, the industry and even universities have to make their money from somewhere, and that money is usually coming from the industry.
Yeah, I mean that's the truth, and it almost sounds like a conspiracy theory, like you said, like there's no big Illuminati guy or whatever, like, but it's the reality. It's like, how are these doctors and industries and insurances and everything that we have around in society, how are they all going to make
Mhm.
their money? Because that's also an issue too. Like we have to tackle that, even though we have to diet right, we still have to tackle, how are we going to keep all these people in business and feed their families
Mhm.
and everything, which I'm not saying like that's a reason to support, like, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
not all this or whatever, but yeah, it's a big issue like you mentioned. So what are your goals, if I may ask, with medicine? I mean, you say you're not practicing right now. Is it something you're
Mhm.
looking to like maybe do some coaching to help people online, or where do you see yourself going down the road?
Yeah, so that's exactly what I've been doing actually since I graduated. Has been teaching people how to actually take control of their lifestyle when it comes to nutrition, when it comes to exercise, sleep, relaxation, mental, social well-being, all the stuff that has an evidence basis for it, for really prolonging your health and making you healthy in the long run, right? So a lifestyle that can last you forever rather than just a quick fix, a pill, a surgery, or whatever, that often just deals with the symptoms, the consequences, rather than the cause. So I actually recently joined forces with John, and we were just actually recently just started our coaching business. Right now is not probably not the best time to start it with the whole outbreak, right? People are going crazy, and not too many people are really in the right mind space right now to just say, yeah, I'm just going to start a coaching program right now. But it's I think one of the most powerful things you can do for your long-term health, and I say this from a scientific literature standpoint, from an evidence-based standpoint, where you're looking at 70 to 80% of the disease burden in Western countries coming from lifestyle-related chronic diseases. So, really, if there's one thing you want to focus your time and energy on to really make the most out of your life and live your life to the fullest, it's really taking care of your lifestyle and your health, because that's what we have the power to control, right? Your genes is not something you can choose which genes you inherit or not, but luckily for us, genes play a much minor role in our health than most people believe.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know who it was. Some plant-based doctor once said, it's genes that load the gun, diet pulls the trigger.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Something along the lines of that.
Think
And
think it's Dr. Esselstyn. Yeah, I've heard that one too.
yeah, it's so good and it makes so much sense. It's like your genes are not your destiny. And yeah, once you start taking care of your health, nutrition, fitness, sleep, like you mentioned, this is the foundation. Once you cover that, you're going to have such a higher chance of living a healthy life and avoiding so many problems down the road, which is awesome.
Yeah.
I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing that together, that you're teaming up and doing the coaching thing, man.
Yeah, no, it's very motivating work, right? Because you're working with something that you know scientifically has a huge potential to help, and then you're also having that human contact. You're teaching people something that they can use for the rest of their life, and yeah, it's very rewarding. You're really helping to turn people's lives around for the better. So I'm super stoked to be doing this with John, and we're partner up with a guy called Taylor, who's a vegan beast who's been doing coaching for over 10 years, and he's a behavioral change coach, and he's been vegan for 10 years as well. So yeah, no, I'm super stoked to be doing it. And just on a side note, when you were talking about the doctors and the lifestyle and all that kind of stuff, I was actually at an event in Israel not too long ago with Dr. Michael Clapper, and we went to dinner after the event, and I was talking with him, and he was telling me a story of one time where he met up with a friend of his and a colleague, Dr. Kim A. Williams, who's the former president of the American College of Cardiology, and at that time, he was working in the hospital in the cardiology department, right? So they were going to this kind of meeting, a hospital meeting, and Michael or Dr. Clapper, he says, he sees Dr. Kim A. Williams walking, and says he looks kind of down. He doesn't look really like he's very happy. So he's like, like, what's going on? What's wrong? What's the matter? You don't look very, you look worried. And he's like, yeah, you see, we've been incorporating the plant-based lifestyle into our cardiology units for a few months now, and the thing is, it's working so well that our patients aren't coming back to us. They're just getting better. They're just getting better, and our funding is like going down. And I had a meeting with our hospital manager, and he said, what's going on? Like, cardiology used to be our one of our biggest sources of income, and now you guys are making almost no money. And he was like, and Michael Clapper was telling me this story, and he was had a big smile on his face. He was like, that's how well this diet and this lifestyle works, where it becomes a problem because they're not getting money, because the people are actually getting better, and then they don't need to come to hospital, right? So it was kind of like, what a weird problem to have as a doctor.
It is. It really is. It's like, what do you do at that point? Like, you're helping people get healthy, but how do you stay in business? It's just like what we were talking
Yeah.
about. That's crazy.
Exactly. So what they were talking about is actually maybe a very interesting concept. I'm not aware of any place in the world that has actually implemented this, but they were talking about how, instead of having what they have now, is you get paid on the basis of people who are admitted to hospital, who are getting treated, who are getting surgical consultations, who are actually getting operations, and they were talking about, instead of doing this, you could actually get paid for people, for keeping people healthy. So having some way where the doctors and the hospitals are reimbursed for having people go back into society faster, and be well, so they can be productive and functional, instead of the traditional way of, the sicker people are, the more you get paid. So some way of reversing that dynamic, where it's actually, you're not getting paid when people get sick, you're getting paid when people are well and are outside the hospital, right? So how exactly they'd go about doing that, is the question. If they were able to figure that out 100%, that would be amazing because especially when it comes to chronic lifestyle related diseases, which is like I said, 70 to 80% of the disease burden. That's what we're talking about, right? Of course, there's always going to be motor vehicle accidents. There are always going to be infectious diseases, emergencies where people have to come in. They have to get acute treatment. They have to get operations, and this is life-saving stuff, and it's amazing stuff, and it's so good. But for the majority of people today, that's not the big issue, right? It's heart attacks, it's strokes, it's cancer, it's diabetes, the amputations, the blindness, the kidney disease, all that kind of stuff. And it's all lifestyle.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And if anything, maybe we can keep the hospitals more empty for people that actually, not that somebody who had a heart attack wouldn't actually need it, but I'm saying
Mhm.
like for more acute problems. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
exactly. Yeah.
So, dude, I don't know if I asked you this. I mean, I know we talked about how you made John go vegan. How did you go vegan? What made you want to go on this journey?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, for me, it was like I mentioned before, as the idea was brought to me by an ex girlfriend, and before I met her, I had never even heard the word. I had no idea what vegans were. I barely knew what vegetarians were. I was a big meat fan my entire life. Half Brazilian. We had barbecues every Saturday. Sunday was seafood. Being half Norwegian, so it was just like a lot of. We To be fair, we always ate a lot of fruits and vegetables, a lot of legumes, a lot of rice and beans, and so we were always relatively healthy. We were not never like the worst in terms of our nutrition. But there was definitely a lot of meat. There was a lot of animal products, and so basically, when I was introduced to this by my ex girlfriend, I had the same reaction that everyone, right? Like, this is weird. What is this kind of tree hugging hippie movement of like love life, love animals, blah blah blah. But and by the way, I say that as I used to think. I don't think that way anymore. I don't want to be condescending towards the ethical. I actually believe the ethical argument is the strongest argument now. It's the thing that motivates me the most. But at that time, that's how I thought. I thought, oh, that's is this kind of a hippie movement or whatever? But then we watched a few documentaries like Forks Over Knives, and it just gave me this impression of being very serious, very scientifically oriented movement. There's a lot of good evidence backing it up, and the arguments just all made sense. And I was like, wait a second, this can't be true. This goes against everything I've been taught. Like, this can't be real. If it's real, I have to find out. So I was already doing my bachelor's in bioengineering, so had already been introduced to critiquing the scientific literature, statistical analysis of studies, all this kind of stuff. Already was in that field, so I just delved into it. I started reading research, and the more I read, the more I was like, whoa, this is actually, there's actually good science backing this up. This is not just, again, quote unquote, a tree hugging hippie kind of movement. There's actually a lot of logic behind this. And so as a scientist, I just have to admit to myself that I was wrong, and the beliefs I used to have for whatever reason were not really aligned with reality, and so I just have to readjust my position and align with myself with the best science, the best information, which shows that plant-based is the way to go. And that's when I went. I was plant-based. I was eating vegan, not just vegan, but whole food plant-based on most days. But I would still make exceptions if I went to a party or a family member or whatever. People, if I was visiting, they offered me something, I'll still eat it. But maybe almost a year into being plant-based on my everyday life, but making a few exceptions here and there, then I got more into the ethical and the environmental aspects. I watched Earthlings, I watched Cowspiracy. I started looking at more of the industrial farming, more of the ethical implications, and that's when I just decided 100% cut it out, right? And that's when I went full soy boy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. 100% soy boy, no shame, dude. I I was like 21. I was watching Forks Over Knives, and I did it for the health reasons as well. But down
Oh,
the
okay,
road,
nice.
I eventually watched Earthlings, and there's no
Hmm.
way I could look away. So at that point, I considered myself plant-based, and I could
Yeah,
easily eat like one egg every now and then, consider myself
yeah,
healthy. But I
yeah,
chose
yeah,
not to include any eggs, any animal products in my life because of the ethical. Like you mentioned, it is
exactly.
the
Yeah.
strongest reason to be vegan, and
For sure.
you
Because,
can.
like you said, you can eat an egg every now and then. You can eat a piece of steak every now and then. You can eat a bit of fish every now and then and be completely healthy. There's no science to suggest that 100% plant-based is better than 99% plant-based, right? We know confidently that mostly, like, vast majority of calories should be coming from plants, but we can't tell you for sure 99 is worse than 100, right? But the ethics is, it's unavoidable. It's you can't argue that causing pain is negative, right, for most people, and there's completely impossible to argue the fact that these animals in these industries are actually going through a lot of unnecessary pain, um, despite all of the rationalizations and all the justifications that are used with humane slaughter and good lives and circle of life and whatever else people use, right? But um, yeah, it's just very, when you're open to setting your emotions aside and just looking at the facts, it's a very very clear picture when it comes to the ethics and the environment too, actually.
Yeah, if you can just sort of drop the ego, drop whatever it is that you've ever learned, and approach this with an open mind, I mean, you'll soon realize that what's happening to animals is unacceptable,
Yeah,
and the environment as well. And the good thing is, it's not bad for you and your body. That's the
exactly.
amazing part, is you don't have to sacrifice, because many people will say, "Oh, how can you like give this up, give this up, give this up?" I'm not giving up anything. I'm embracing other things that you're not seeing because you're not approaching
Mhm.
this with an open mind.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And it's like you say, so many misconceptions around this, right? Like healthy food tastes disgusting. That's the one thing people think. There's so many amazingly delicious foods that are extremely healthy. You can have super delicious, healthy meals, right? So that's completely the opposite of what's true. And when it comes to the environment and when it comes to all these things, it's like you say, it's so clear, and that's why it's so easy for people to be so passionate about veganism. It's because there's very few things in life where you have such a win-win-win-win-win-win-win situation, right? It's like everywhere you look, like the environment, it gets better. Okay, the animal suffering, what your contribution to that gets better, health gets better, right? It's like it's just so many layers on top of layers of positives, and when it comes to, you can even add the corona stuff now. You can add the human hunger, human well-being, all this kind of stuff. Slaughterhouse workers are some of the worst jobs, worst industries to be in, right? When it comes to their well-being and their health and accidents and all that kind of stuff. When it comes to the outbreaks that we talked about, that's mostly animal related too, right? So it's just so many things that just stack up on each other. That it's definitely very difficult as someone who discovers this not to be super passionate and not to be pushy. So that's very understandable that people are like, "Hey, I just found this amazing thing. I want to share it with everyone." But again, we have to sometimes just take that step back and just look at it completely pragmatically from an efficiency point of view, like what is going to get this word out there the most efficiently and the most effectively, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, the benefits keep going on, but you have to not argue, like you mentioned, and just have open discussions with people. And if they want to embrace this lifestyle, they may, and they will turn into soldiers like you and your brother. Like, you guys are such great examples of this lifestyle, man. You guys have like such great bodies and like, muscles and stuff. And it's great because it attracts people to want to eat this way. You know what I mean?
Yeah, stop now, you're making me blush, Tino. No, but no, it's true. That's the living by example is one of the most efficient ways for sure. Yeah,
Yeah, no, you guys are killing it, man. Yeah, and one video I watched by you, man, which just blows my mind. It's like, of course, everyone says where you get your protein. The one
yeah.
video you made, you ate 250 grams of protein. And if anyone who
Hmm.
doesn't know nutrition, like, that's a lot, man. That's a lot of food, a lot of
Huge. Yeah,
protein.
yeah.
Talk a little bit about that day, if you can kind of remember, how that was, or if you just do this
Yeah.
often. Like, that's a lot of food, man.
Yeah, so that's the thing. I mean, from what I remember, I wasn't even. Of course, you can argue that it's maybe a little bit more difficult to find really high protein sources, or especially if you're doing something new, it's always going to be harder to do something new that you're not used to than something you've done your entire life, right? Of course, there's going to be an adjustment period, and you're going to have to learn a few things. But there's so many high protein sources, so many sources of food that are high in protein. And by the way, the protein story is only really an issue if you really want to be like really big, like if you want to be like kind of, bodybuilding, build muscle. Like otherwise, it's not really something to waste your time thinking about, because if you're eating enough calories, if you're eating enough whole foods, you're gonna get more than enough protein, right? But if you're really just looking to optimize as much as possible, grow your physique, grow your muscles, then yeah, like whether you're vegan or not, you're going to have to think about protein, and you're going to have to think about your nutrition. You're going to have to think about your training. You're going to have to think about your sleep, your stress levels, all this kind of stuff. But for me, when it comes to the food, it's really just eating a lot of the higher sources of protein on the vegan diet. So we're talking about nuts, seeds. We're talking about legumes, tofu, tempeh, a lot of stuff, and even some grains and vegetables are surprisingly high. But it's just the other thing I get is I eat a lot. I have to admit that. So I eat a lot more than most people, right? So it's one of the things I get from people is like, well, I couldn't go vegan, man, because I could never eat as much as you. And I'm like, whoa, 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 relax. I ate like this way before I was vegan. Like I've always eaten huge like I've always been a big food kind of guy. I can eat a lot, right? I remember, in schools and football or soccer tournaments, wherever I went, I would just sit at buffets, would just sit like portion after portion after portion, and people would be looking like, where does all this food go? Like, what's going on? So, I always used to boast that my most flexible body part is my stomach. But yeah, it's not really the the healthiest way of living. So I'm actually trying to cut down a little bit on my huge portion sizes. But yeah, I believe that day that you're talking about, that I wasn't even trying to eat as much protein as humanly possible. I was just eating a wide variety of food with a little bit of I do of course always have a little my eye is kind of open to protein sources, and just kind of adding that to every meal, and you get easily uh, more than enough protein for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And you do what? You weightlift, you do jujitsu, I think. You do a lot of sports, so you're active and your body requires you to eat that much. So
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
someone doesn't necessarily have to replicate that for themselves if, it
Yeah.
depends on what they do, of course. But yeah, I kind of want to go into the next part of the discussion, like into fitness and,
Mhm.
what you eat, how you train and everything. So tell me
Mhm.
a little bit about like do you do the vegan proteins like tofu, seitan, tempeh, or even like processed stuff like Beyond Meat, which has like a lot of protein in
Mhm.
itself? Do you do any of those?
Well, I mean, the processed stuff I'll do on rare occasions where, out of curiosity, I want to try or taste, or if I'm at a party or whatever. But everyday life, again, from a health point of view, it's what you do on your everyday that really makes a difference, right? It's not what you do on special occasions. So yeah, I would avoid most things like Beyond Meat and those kinds of things. I would still have tempeh and tofu. Those are quite minimally processed. They're actually, as far as I'm aware, as long as you're not eating huge amounts, which some evidence suggests could raise your IGF-1 levels, like a lot of other foods do. But again, you could also argue in the context of an otherwise very healthy diet, having a little bit of food that might raise your IGF-1 a little bit might not be such a big deal either. But yeah, tofu, tempeh, I do definitely eat quite a bit of. Seitan, not so much sometimes. And then yeah, just a lot of nuts, seeds, legumes, chickpeas, split peas, lentils, beans, all that kind of stuff. And then yeah, some grain like quinoa, brown rice. A lot of these things, have surprisingly high amounts of protein. So especially if you're working out a lot, especially if you're requiring a lot of calories, if you're smashing in those foods, you're also smashing in the protein. And most people far overestimate protein requirements. I've seen people talking about, 2 grams per pound and all sorts of crazy numbers, which is like it's completely unnecessary. You're just torturing your kidneys at that point.
That's for sure insanely high for sure. Do you follow? I don't know if you track this stuff besides like when you make your videos like on a day to day, but do you like feel like you fall in like the 1 gram per pound or like 1.2, or I don't know if you ever like.
Definitely, yeah, definitely. On average, I would say a little bit less than 1 gram per pound. But I try to get close to that usually, just because I'm trying to optimize muscle gain, especially now that I'm trying to catch up to my swole bro, who's a absolute monster here. But yeah, and and he eats even less protein. So, there's also individual variation, right? Some people might need more than others, even if you're the same size and same weight. John usually eats, I'd say, probably less than 150 grams of protein on his, everyday life, and he weighs definitely over 200 pounds. So quite a bit less than one gram per pound, and he's massive. So yeah, it's definitely from person to person. It varies also caloric intake, right? Some people need more calories than others, and then of course depending on the sport. If you're doing a lot of other sports, then of course you're not going to progress as quickly. If you're doing your main focus is bodybuilding and you're training for that, then you're going to get more results than someone who's mixing it up and doing a lot of different sports.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. What do you do any like protein shakes as well? Do you follow that?
Yeah, yeah. So I've gone on and off for many years using protein powders and not. And for me, I use it as a convenience tool. It's just rather than just always planning on bringing the high protein foods, right? And this is again talking about bodybuilding, whether you're vegan or not. Every bodybuilder you see, that they're obsessed almost with food, right? They're bringing food everywhere. They have like 10 Tupperwares, at all times. Just like every single meal is planned, and it's a lot of work. It's a lot of dedication, a lot of work, and for someone who's busy and is doing a lot of different things, it's just the protein powder is just such a convenient way to take a scoop, boom, blend it up in a smoothie, finished. It's more than anything a convenience tool for me, and just I like to bring it to everyone's attention as well. Again, because I feel it's so heavily emphasized in the media. We're almost brainwashed to the point now that we think healthy is big muscles. Like you think someone is healthy when they have big muscles. It's two completely different things, two completely separate topics. So having big muscles has nothing to do with your health. And when it comes to optimal health, you're probably better off actually having a bit smaller muscles than what is usually, on the posters of all these magazines and YouTube and Instagram and all these different social media. So from a health point of view, the protein is a non-issue. It's a non-topic. It's so easy to get enough. It really only is something of interest if you're really trying to maximize your gains and really trying to maximize your muscles. But other than that, it's not really that important.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. I mean, for just being healthy, yeah, you really need like very little. You can eat it. You can eat your food blindly, like as long as you're eating like whole food,
Mm.
based foods. But for sure, if you're trying to look at building some muscle, I think it's something to definitely be more conscious about, like you mentioned. Um, so when it's time to like prepare a meal, right? You got your plate in front of you. Do you portion it in terms of like types of foods? Like, okay, this is like half my plate's going to be starch, maybe like a quarter protein, a quarter vegetables. I'm just like naming examples. Or do you break it down by maybe like macros, which is very popular among the YouTube and Instagram community? What do you like to do?
Yeah, so I'm actually, despite being a scientist, I'm very like my everyday eating is like the opposite of scientific. I basically just eat whatever I feel like. I always have an eye on, what are the food groups I want to include from a health point of view. Like, you want to include some berries, you want to include some flax seeds, you want to include enough leafy greens and vegetables, and et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of the things I think about. Like, have I eaten this yet today? And kind of including that from a health point of view. But when it comes to macros and portion sizes and half of the plate, this or that, I usually just go whatever I feel like, throw it in there. And of course, I always try to have a few different food groups in. Like dinner always has to have vegetables. Always has to, either have a lot of vegetables or a lot of leafy greens or big salad, something like that. But no, I just eat whatever dish I'm eating and just make sure it's the health, the food groups are healthy, the ingredients are healthy, and then I track sometimes just to see how I'm doing and then see where the macros are falling. And I think from the scientific calculation macro kind of point of view, it's helpful when you're just checking what you're doing and you're seeing if you're going to be completely religious about following a program or something like that. If you're going on stage for a bodybuilding contest, these things can be useful. But even at a very high level, if you're trying to be very fit and healthy, intuitive eating is just so much easier to do if you just figure it out. After some experience, after doing it a few times, you figure out what you need. It's just so much easier. It takes so many headaches away from having to weigh every single food and calculate every single thing. So it's just, I think it's the most sustainable way to eat is just kind of knowing what you eat and knowing the food groups and just making sure you're getting enough of all the different healthy food groups rather than really having to become like an eccentric mad scientist where you're just weighing up every single gram and calculating every percent and putting it into your formula. Like for me, it's interesting to do every now and then just to see where you're at, but it's not sustainable. And from a scientific point of view, there's no evidence suggesting that like 80-10-10 or 70-15-15 or 60-20-20 is like the perfect macro combination for every, like that. We don't have that. So there is no good evidence. Anyone who tells you that like is for sure 100% this is the best way, like it's not, right? We've evolved in a way where we're supposed to be able to use nutrients from various different sources and be quite adaptable in what we eat. So there is no one way of eating that is best for everyone.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there's been times where I've tracked my stuff for like months on end, and it was cool. I have the data in front of me, but like it's just not, for me personally at least, it's not sustainable, like you mentioned, because then I'll get stressed.
Mhm.
I'll say, oh, I didn't hit like this amount of protein and my fat like went over by this much. It just becomes too stressful. As long as you
Mhm.
know what healthy foods are to avoid oils. That's another thing I think we didn't really talk about. How
Yeah,
calorically dense and bad oils are for your cardiovascular system. But just knowing like what foods to avoid, what foods to eat in general, and then just making sure you're getting enough of it. It sounds like
exactly,
what you do. Um,
exactly.
yeah, yeah. And going back to supplements, when you mentioned you take protein, do you take creatine or anything else in addition to that?
Yeah, so the main sports supplements I've taken are definitely protein powder and creatine. Creatine as well. I've kind of been uh, on and off. Like first few years, maybe I didn't take it so much, but then started experimenting with it, and definitely seems to have an effect for me. But more importantly, I never really trust anecdotal evidence. More importantly, there's a lot of good research suggesting that most people get a very real and good effect when it comes to explosive sports. So sprinting, weightlifting, all that kind of stuff, right? Um, but otherwise, I've experimented a tiny bit. I tried taurine once. I tried beta alanine once, but there's not that much evidence in that. Most of these things are things that your body produces anyway. So it's just for me, it's there's just not enough of a evidence base for me to really be that motivated to take them. But yeah, I've tried those like once or twice for short periods of time. But mainly it's just protein powder and creatine. That's it.
Nice. So I'm going to try to summarize my understanding of creatine, and if I'm talking out of my ass, dude, feel free to jump in at any point. But
Sure, sure.
creatine, like you said, I think it gives you energy, right, for those explosive sports. It also,
Mhm.
I think, accelerates muscle growth. But what I've found, and please correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I would just say, I mean, like just because you just made those points, I would say, the in terms of the energy storage, it's actually one of the, ATP is the main energy currency in the body, and the creatine actually binds to phosphate, becomes creatine phosphate, and that's the kind of the energy storage in the muscle. So when your muscles are doing something high intensity, explosive movements such as sprinting, weightlifting, stuff like that, where it's just using huge bursts of energy and not really having time to go into the aerobic respiration or the oxidative respiration where you're taking oxygen and your muscles are that usually takes time, so you're really relying on anaerobic respiration, the glycolytic pathway where you're just breaking down sugar and you're just pumping out ATP, and then you're using the phosphate from the ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, so you're taking one of those phosphates and you're using that as chemical energy to contract your muscles, and then when you're using that ATP it becomes ADP, so adenosine diphosphate, and then the creatine can come in and actually give its phosphate away to replenish it back to ATP, and so you have a little bit of extra energy to take you a few extra seconds or and stuff like that. So and that's really why it's so good for explosive sports, and the way it really stimulates bigger muscles and stuff like that is in two ways. Number one is because it allows you to lift a little bit heavier, a little bit more in these explosive. Then you're going to be getting a bigger workload. You're increasing the intensity and the volume that you can get in your workouts, and that stimulates your muscles to grow faster. And the other thing is just the water retention as well, right? So creatine usually increases water retention, which makes you maybe look a little bit bigger, and makes you a bit heavier as well. So it's the only recognized side effect of creatine in all of the studies and thousands of people. Some studies have even taken 20, 30 years of people taking creatine, and the only side effect really documented is a small weight gain because of the extra water retention.
Yeah. Yeah. See, I told you would sound way smarter if you talked about it than I did. But the one thing I've heard about creatine though, it's if you take it long term, it's that your body starts to rely on the supplement as opposed to creating its own. Do you know anything about that part?
Yeah, I've definitely heard that argument, but I've never come across research papers that actually show that people who, like I said, there's papers of following people who have been taking it for 20 years without seeing any kind of negative consequences. So I've never seen any paper that actually suggests this could be a thing. But I've definitely heard a lot of people have those worries, and actually some people, that's why they kind of take it for a few months, and then they'll take maybe like half a month or a month where they take no creatine whatsoever, to kind of just give your body a little kind of break where it's like it has to produce its own again or something. But again, a lot of these things are just people trying to think their way through this area that just doesn't have there's just very little evidence or research to suggest it. The other worry a lot of people have is actually hair loss. Some people think that taking creatine will make you lose your hair, and the whole idea came from a study from early 2000s, I believe, where they found that some people who took creatine, and it was something like 20-30% of the people who took it in that study actually had an increase in DHT, which is dihydrotestosterone, which is like the active form of testosterone. And in a separate study, then we also have, or in other studies, we also have this association between high dihydrotestosterone and hair loss. So then people were kind of like doing this thing that in science is a big no-no. It's not good, not good practice. Is where you're taking a connection between one study, and then you're taking leaping over to a connection in another study, and then you're connecting the two, and then making an inference or a conclusion based on those, which is okay. So this study says creatine can increase DHT in some people. This study says DHT can lead to hair loss. So I'm going to jump and say creatine, hair loss, which is a very, very big leap, and there is no, that's almost 20 years ago now, and still to this day there's not been a single study showing a real link between creatine and hair loss. So it's something that I personally would not worry about. It's hair loss is mostly a genetic thing for most men when it comes to male pattern balding.
Right. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. I never heard of that before, but yeah, that's very interesting. I'm glad you shared those benefits with creatine because it's something I personally have been wanting to look into more. So thank you for that. In terms
Oh,
of
my pleasure.
yeah, in terms of workouts, right? What would you recommend to somebody who's looking to build muscle, like say like somebody like me, dude? Like I've been a cyclist like most of my like
Yeah.
vegan life. Like I've been cycling like since I was around 21, so I became a cyclist around the time I became a vegan. Anyhow,
Okay.
over the past couple years I've been trying to build more muscle, and I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who want to just like pack a little bit more muscle and just feel better physically. What are the workouts you would recommend in terms of focusing on?
Yeah, sure. Let's do a free coaching session right now, Tino.
Right.
No, so I guess my first question to you would be, what are you planning on training, kind of weight training, in that as your main focus, or are you planning on combining it with cycling or combining it with other sports, right? Because depending on how many days you're dedicating to the gym, we'd find a different split to be able to hit the right amount of volume per week. So if you're dedicating every day to the gym, or 6 times a week to the gym, I would say something like push pull leg splits would be a nice way to go about it, where you can hit most muscle groups twice a week. Whereas if you only have 3 or 4 days, then something like upper, lower slash even full body workout could be more helpful for you. But the main determinants of muscle growth, apart from obviously nutrition, sleep, relaxation, not stressing, mental well-being, all that kind of stuff, uh, is for sure going to be the training. And the main determinant there is progressive overload, right? So it's over time increasing either the intensity or the volume, or both, of your workouts. The intensity, by the way, for people listening, is basically the percent of your max weight that you're using. And obviously the heavier you're lifting, the stronger you're getting, the more that's going to increase. And then the volume is just it's the weight times reps. So if you're increasing your weights and doing the same amount of reps over time, then you're automatically increasing your volume. If you're keeping your weights the same but increasing your reps over time, then you're also increasing your volume, right? So there's a lot of ways to tweak this, but intensity and volume, those are the two main factors that are used in progressive overload.
Gotcha. And I've heard of this concept before, like strength building and then like muscle or bodybuilding rather, where it's just like
Mm.
one's like focused mainly on size, the other one's focused mainly on strength and the
Yeah,
volume that you can lift. So I guess it
yeah,
would depend on that, of course, on the person's
yeah.
preference
And
and
both,
everything.
yeah, both are, both help each other, right? So if you're doing strength training, that will usually get you some exercise. And, if you're focusing on just getting as much size as possible, that will also help you get stronger. But it's just which part are you optimizing, right? If you're a huge bodybuilder, you're going to be very strong, but you might not be as strong as you could have been. And if you're like one of the strongest guys in the world, you're doing powerlifting, you're an absolute monster, you're also going to be very big, but you could probably have been even bigger if you optimize that aspect. So they're both a little bit interchangeable. They help each other a little bit. But yeah, you're right, there's kind of like two directions to go.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. And my last question is, if somebody's been doing this like for a little while, like they go on a whole food plant-based diet and are just not seeing the results that they want, is there
Mm.
any tips? And I know that's like a big question, but are there
Yeah,
like little things like, and it doesn't have to be about just diet, which we mainly talked about, but are there like just other things people should be conscious about and aware,
yeah.
instead of just like blaming, oh, I went whole food plant based, I'm not gaining muscle, I don't feel healthier. Like, is there other stuff like you
Yeah.
would recommend people look at as well?
100%. I mean, I always, just to, I feel like that's a pretty big question. So how am I going to answer this the best? First, to start off, the biggest mistake most people make is just not eating enough calories. That's like the simplest, but the most common mistake is people are going from uh, the way of eating that they're used to, where small portions can still have a lot of calories, to eating very healthy, very whole foods, but that are not very calorically dense. So they're having bigger portions and still eating far less calories. And I actually had well, now he's actually training to be an orthopedic surgeon, very smart guy. He was in my class studying medicine, and he actually told me one summer he tried going vegan. And he's like a southerner, Louisiana, so apologies if I'm butchering his accent, but he's like, yeah, man, I was eating so much salads, man, and I was so tired, man. And I was like, yeah, so what else were you eating, like salads? And he was like, yeah, man, like tons of salads, and like huge salads. And I was like, yeah, 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 what else? Like, man, I was just eating a lot of salads, man. I was like, bro, like, and apparently he actually fell asleep during his workout, like in the gym, falling asleep, and then all his friends were like, oh yeah, he's doing that vegan thing, so it's like the worst, like worst example imaginable. I was like, no, like, what have you done? Like, that's the worst thing you could have done. So like, for sure, calories is for 100% the first thing that I would go to, is really make sure you're eating enough calories, and look at caloric density, make sure you're eating foods that have a lot of calories per unit of weight, right? Other things is allergies, intolerances, and sensitivities. A lot of people have these things. It would really be keep an eye out for those, and maybe try experimenting, switching things around. Obviously, the only way to be 100% sure is doing an elimination diet, where you kind of figure out exactly what things you're sensitive to. You could also do some blood tests to see if there's any very obvious allergies you have. But these are some of the things that I would definitely keep an eye out from a nutrition point of view. But I always preach the holistic approach, right? When it comes to health and well-being, you really want to, if you can do one thing right, which is going to get you 30% of the results, but then you can instead do five things right, which get you like 95% of the results. Much better to do, focus on all of the things that have been shown by the evidence to support your health and fitness goals. So we're always talking about nutrition, but we're also talking about the exercise. We're talking about sleep. We're talking about relaxation, mental well-being, and psychology. The mental well-being is so huge. It's probably I would say apart from and all of these things are interchangeable. They all affect each other. The more of all these things that you're including into your life, the more they will work off of and build up on each other, and you go into this kind of positive spiral, right? Whereas the fewer you do, the harder it gets, and it's like a negative spiral. So, but I think the psychology is absolutely one of the most important things. It's one of the most underestimated things in mental health and mental well-being. Is just really being aware of how the human mind works. And it's just such a fascinating topic because most people think human beings are these extremely rational, conscious, logical geniuses that just walk around and everything we do is just based on the holy gift of intelligence that we walk around with. That's not the case. Like human beings are subconscious animals for the most part. Most of our decision making, most of the processes that are going on are happening at a kind of automatic subconscious level. And when it comes to mental well-being, being aware of some of these mindsets, some of these beliefs that you have, some of these patterns of thinking, and then actually doing things, taking actions to change those into, I wouldn't even say good or bad, because for the most part, your subconscious is not created by you. It's created by your environment. It's created by, like I said, so many things from the moment you're born until today, right? From parents to schools to teachers to friends to rumors on the street to TV ads and radios, whatever it is. There's so many things that are influencing you at all times. So number one, it's not your fault. It's not your blame to, you shouldn't be blamed for the way your subconscious mind works. So that's number one thing I always say is take the shame away, because obviously, it's a result of something outside of your control, external factors that are outside your control. It makes no sense to blame yourself for that. So that's number one. But then, so I don't say it's good or bad patterns of thinking or subconscious patterns of thinking. I say it's helpful or unhelpful. So if you find patterns of thinking, if you find mindsets and beliefs that you have that are unhelpful to you, unhelpful to your current situation, then being aware of them and actually keeping an eye out and recognizing them is obviously the first big step. And then taking steps to doing what we call in psychology a cognitive restructuring, which is basically changing these beliefs and changing these patterns into more helpful ones. So more realistic and more helpful to your situation. So things like CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy, which is probably the most evidence-based approach for things like anxiety, depression, many personality disorders, etc., is really talking about this. It's really finding the awareness, making people aware of that these things are happening, and then slowly but surely changing those ways of thinking until you basically you change your subconscious. You basically change who you are in a way. So it's very fascinating. You can actually change a person at such a fundamental level. So things like visualization, affirmations, meditation, getting real life experience. So in CBT, we have something called exposure response prevention, where with a lot of you actually give your subconscious proof from real life, where say you're afraid of, probably the easiest example to explain it by is, say someone has a fear of dogs or something, right? You'll put a person first in the same building as a dog, and you'll just talk to them. You'll make sure you do like routines to make them relax and make sure they're in a relaxed state before you end the session. Next time, you put them in the same room, again doing meditations, relaxing, making sure your physiology gets to a calm state before you end the session. Next time, you're closer and closer and closer until eventually you're even like touching the dog, you're talking to the dog, and you get the person to the point where they're completely calm. So you're like, your subconscious thinks one way, and then you're just pounding it with real life evidence to the contrary, to the point where your subconscious is like, wait a second, that's not reality. Like, it's okay. I can be fine around this, right? So Yeah, and sorry to ramble on for so long. This is something I'm very interested in. The human psychology, behavioral psychology is such a fascinating topic. It's literally how, you know, understanding how this aspect of human beings works. It really empowers you to literally change who you are and change the way your brain works and how you think. I mean, that's amazing. It's completely amazing. So yeah, I think that's a huge impact on it. Probably the number one thing, apart from genetic diseases and big health problems. I think your psychology and having some sort of control over your mindset is probably the number one thing that's going to determine what you do in your life, really. So it's a very important thing. And from a mental health point of view as well, apart from the awareness of subconscious, it's also very important to be optimistic. Is another thing. People think that, oh, we have pessimists and optimists, and it's just who you are. It's just you were born this way. But it's actually been shown that actually focusing on positivity, focusing on optimistic thoughts, can actually have a very positive effect on your health. Yeah, I think it was Albert Einstein had a nice quote on this. Actually, it was something like, one of the most important decisions in your life is to decide whether you live in a friendly universe or not. So like you decide that. Obviously, it's not like, oh, I'm going to say I'm living in a friendly universe, so the universe is friendly. No, it's like, of course, there's both good and bad. Right? There's both evil. There's a lot of crap going on. We talked about the animal cruelty. There's human cruelty. There's all sorts of stuff. But there's also amazing, beautiful, human beings. There's so much love. There's so many good things in life as well. So it's really about what you choose to focus on, and focusing on the good things definitely tends to lead to a lot more healthy consequences for you. And then the third thing is the um, social well-being. So we are social animals. We evolved in groups of 50 to 100 to 200 people. Like we're basically herd animals. We're whether you be an introvert or extrovert, or you identify yourself as one or the other, we all need social contact. And this is something that you I guess now during the corona times is a bit being blocked a little bit by the quarantining and stuff. But for general health, it's very important that you do make sure to have that aspect of your life handled as well. So it's just so many things. I think if anyone ever talks about health, it's just such a interesting topic because there's so much that goes into it, right? If anyone goes, oh yeah, the secret to health is eating chocolates, or it's exercising, or the secret to health is this. Like, no, the secret to health is a million things. It's such a big topic, but really, I think that approach, the holistic approach of taking all of the aspects that have been shown, so really trying to optimize your diet, your exercise, your sleep, your mental, social well-being, your relaxation routines that you have in your daily life, being outside in nature, fresh air, all that kind of stuff, really can transform your life. And that's always what I try to do. Obviously, I'm not gonna say to someone, "Hey, here's 100 new things for you to do. Go." Like it doesn't work, right? So you have to, obviously, like whenever you're doing big changes, you have to go one step at a time, and eventually, you get most of the stuff down and you feel amazing. But it's a step-by-step process. And when it comes to behavioral change, it's really the consistency over larger periods of time that allow you to kind of repeat and hammer those things into to the point where it becomes new habits, it becomes new subconscious beliefs, and eventually you become a new, it becomes a new lifestyle, new way of being. You become a new person where this is just what you do. So yeah, sorry, that was a very long, over the top answer, but I hope I answer your question.
Absolutely, man. I wasn't expecting that. I mean, we went from eating enough calories to cognitive behavioral therapy to Albert Einstein. So, dude, I love it. I love it. Dude, no, life
Awesome.
life is complex. Like anyone who thinks that just changing what's on your plate is going to solve all your problems is delusional.
Exactly. Yeah.
I mean, for whatever reason, you got to start looking at all aspects of life. It's great that you want to eat a whole food plant-based diet. It's great you want to exercise, but like you mentioned, look at all these different aspects and start, considering every single aspect of your life and just strive to be the best person that you can be. Well said, man.
Yeah.
I appreciate that.
Awesome.
Dude,
Yeah, I'm glad to hear it.
yeah, yeah. Dude, you're a very smart guy, man, and I love what you're going to be doing with your brother. Both of you obviously being YouTubers, and people can go and watch you guys' videos for free on YouTube, a lot of the great information that you guys share. Where
For
can
sure.
people connect with you, though, if they want to work one-on-one with you guys and they really need help? How can people contact you guys?
Yeah, so I mean, we all have our different social media. So Taylor, our behavioral coach, is the vegan trainer. John is just Jon Venus on Instagram. I'm Dr. Leo Venus, and we all also have our YouTube channel. So Taylor is Power Plant Body. John is again Jon Venus, and I'm Dr. Leo Venus. So not too much variation there. But yeah, if you go on our social media profiles on our Instagrams, we always have links to our coaching websites that you can click on, and you can, if you're interested in working with us one on one, you can send us, whatever it is that you want help with. It. We have an application that people fill out, and then we usually jump on a call with people to hear the exact in and outs and the details of what it is that they need help with, and how and if we can help them. So yeah, I think either Instagram is probably the easiest way to find us, but we're also on YouTube, and usually we have those links pretty much plastered all over the place, so it's not too difficult to find us.
Yeah, I love it. And I'll have all your links and websites in the show notes below so people can find it conveniently. But dude, I want to thank you for coming on again. I mean, I really resonated with a lot of what you said, man. You shared a lot of great information, and I hope people really listened all the way through because it was a lot of great info, and I think it can help a lot of people. But yeah, thanks for coming on, man. I know you're in
Yeah.
Spain and it's super late and you need to go to bed immediately, but feel free to connect, man, and come back on anytime that you want.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, man. You're right. It's 1 a.m. here. I'm kind of on my last power bar here, but man, it's been an absolute pleasure, and I always find it's such a blessing to be able to connect with people. You're in Maryland, I'm in Spain. We're in so like different parts of the world, and yet we're talking here over on video chat, and feel like I've made a new friend today. So it's been absolutely great. I really enjoyed the talk, and I just have to thank you as well for having me on. I really enjoyed myself.